Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session today. We'll be getting started in just a couple minutes, but I wanted to say hi to everybody. If you're watching, just throw a hi in the chat. We'll be trying to monitor the chat as we go through this. Hopefully, we can make this be a little bit conversational as you have questions and as things come up. We can highlight different chat messages as they come in. But please say hi and see how things are going. I'm going to bring in our panel today. Let me bring everyone in. We have David Ross, Jamie Grant, and Laura. Hi, everybody. So to get started, I was going to let David just say a few words about the series today and what we're planning to cover. David?
Thanks, Natty. Welcome, everybody, to the virtual prep session from Career Services. So today is the first of a two-part session where we're going to focus today on industry insights to share a little bit more about a few popular industries that students have expressed interest into and hopefully provide some perspective for those that are considering opportunities in those areas. And then tomorrow's event will focus a little bit more on job search essentials, which will cover a lot of different things that people think about as they navigate their individual searches, resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, and interviewing condensed into one session. So we're really excited to be here today to present to you. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jamie.
Jamie, do we want to do intros first? We want to say hi, who we are, kind of thing?
I think we can certainly do that.
Yeah. Do you want to get started, David, with like who you are and everything?
Absolutely. So my name is David Ross. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Career Initiatives here in Career Services. I have been in the office for about 15 years, working with undergraduates the entire time, and excited to be here today.
Great, and I'll grab it from there. Hi, I'm Jamie Grant. I'm the Senior Associate Director for the engineering team here in Career Services. This is my 14th September in Penn Career Services working with engineering students. I see both undergrads and master's candidates, and I'm really excited to talk with you all today. So thanks for having me.
Everybody, I am Natty. I'm the Senior Associate Director on the Wharton Undergrad team here in Career Services. I've been here about going on 7 years, but only one full year on the Wharton team. Before that, I was on the College of Arts and Sciences. So excited to chat with everyone today. Laura?
Hi, everyone. They just needed someone else to fill in. So actually, I'm not well versed in anything I'm talking about. No, I'm just kidding. I've been at Penn for almost a year now. I am an associate director working on the college team. And I'm really excited to help answer your questions and talk to you a little bit about what we do here.
Cool. So Jamie, did you want to get started? I'll bring up your part.
Thank you, Natty. I appreciate that very much. So we'll just give that a few seconds to load up. And I had a lot of fun putting this together. I'm really trying to ensure that we stay within our allotted time. So I'll do my best to run through and preface all of it by saying there could be some common things that you hear across ways to research and learn more about industries, but every interest that you might have can have little niche differences. So thanks for tuning in and hearing about the special things for pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. So I wanted to, there we go. First, give us sort of a leveling question. Are they the same field? You hear about pharma and biotech together. Biotech and pharma sort of used interchangeably all the time. And there's an important distinction to make. So they both produce products, and not just medicines, but that's pretty much what biotech and pharma are often known for. But biotech industry products come from living organisms. So you come into contact with biotechnology every day of your life, from the foods you eat to the vaccines you may have had to, eating bread, like I mentioned, using laundry detergent that has enzymes. All of these different things have biotechnology embedded within them. So that's a really interesting way to think about a very, very big industry. Excuse me. Pharma companies, on the other hand, primarily create products that have a chemical basis. So other medical conditions you mentioned that you can see mentioned there, asthma inhalers, Tylenol, anything that you can think of that come from a lot of big pharma companies. And there's not only big pharma, of course, but lots of organizations at many, many different sizes, excuse me. And you can see links below to the resources that I pulled this data from. So that's one way to sort of level the field, organic and inorganic sources for materials. Pulling some data from a couple other great resources to give us a leveling factor too, there's about 100 big companies in the US pharma industry. The top 10 companies, like I mentioned, are big pharma, but there's about 2,800 biotech companies. And IBIS World you'll see referred to elsewhere in my presentation as we talk about ways to dig a little deeper into industry information and company information. But the reference here, and I'll touch on this again as well, the Vault Guide to Pharmaceuticals and Biotechnology Jobs, 3rd edition, which is the most recent, was published, I believe, last year or the year before. Vault Guides are a great, great way to learn about a lot of different industries. So you'll hear them mentioned throughout the day today. When we think about the different companies that exist in either of these two spaces, you're going to see names that you likely are very familiar with. J&J, Merck, Pfizer. Of course, if any of us have COVID-19 vaccines or heard about them in the news, we know about Moderna and BioNTech and their partnership with Pfizer. And there's a lot of interaction at times between these two industries, but this gives us some sense of who are the big players. And that is a really, really wonderful way to begin to understand an industry, is by seeing who are the organizations involved and what kinds of things can we learn about their things that are happening in the news, right? There's different career pathways in biotech and pharma as well. And I wanted to be sure that we were, again, thinking about all the different ways that you can engage in an industry. There's lots of different ways to have a job function. So you could be in business dev, you could be a clinical researcher, you could be on the legal side of the house, you could do regulatory affairs, because both biotech and pharma are highly regulated environments. So you've got the FDA involved in a lot of things that are being produced from these two industries. You hear a lot of people talk about research and development, a lot of people talk about product management or project management. So there's a lot of different avenues to get involved if these industries, if this biotech and pharma universe is something that you want to get involved with, despite or, including any major that you might be, any level of program that you might be within. So in terms of learning about an industry, there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about that process too. And I brought up a couple little facts to help us sort of, like I said, level out. But you may want to be looking at things like market trends and those key organizations, like I mentioned, the big pharma companies and all the top biotech firms you might know. What supply chain and distribution looks like. And we've all heard in the news about supply chain problems, and we all know there's been tons of press about when medications aren't getting to where they need to be and what that means for people. So you're hearing about these things in your everyday life, I would anticipate, and that's good to be thinking about as you're digging deeper into learning about your industry. Who is using pharmacological products and biotechnology products? What tech advances are happening? COVID-19 vaccine showed us how mRNA, has made such a radical change in the way so many diseases are being treated. And now we're on the cusp of seeing what artificial intelligence can do for drug discovery and development, potentially erasing years of research that has to be done and compressing it all and using tools in AI to help us do that. So there's a lot of really exciting things that are going on with challenges that are coming up, innovations that are happening, new research. If you're more on the finance and business side, what are investment opportunities? Remember, there was 2,800 biotech companies. There's a lot of startups, a lot of venture funding and capital searches and all those kinds of good things too. So you can be thinking of that. There's not just the US market, which is the most mature market for pharma and biotech, but there's a global market for this. Of course, wherever there's humans, there's potential need for these types of products. Industry jargon and terminology is a great way to make yourself more comfortable with the vernacular of the field that you want to go into. And there's lots of guides and resources to help us with that. And then, as I was mentioning before, the different career pathways that you can follow. And these are all really, really key points to consider if we're doing a dive into what an industry is. So where do I even start? That's a question I get a lot in my advising for students. And I like to think of it as one of two or both strategies that you could apply. Choosing your preferred style to start, whether you're doing independent research and things like the Career Services Communities Guide, or learn how to explore industries, pulling up things like I mentioned, the Vault Guides, which you can search right on our Career Services website for Vault Guides and find them linked in all manner of places to help guide you into primers for what different industries can be. You could be looking at the Lippincott Library research guides, and I have a little screenshot of that as well. Or if you like to talk to people instead of digging into research first, you could certainly use tools like My Penn and LinkedIn to help us find people in these industries that went to Penn from all manner of backgrounds and study areas to learn a little bit more about what their experiences have been. Independent research, just to give you a little dig into how that part will work. Like I said, under our Learn How To or Exploration tabs on our website, you can explore careers and industries and pull things like the Vault guides. Excellent tools if you're really just starting out and learning and really getting insight written by people who have worked in those career fields and those industries their whole professional lives. We've also got the Penn Library's Lippincott Library Research Guide. So this is a picture of the Penn Library Search Guide. You just type in research guides and it will pull up the whole side of all the different things that exist in that space. And when I say that Lippincott Library, which is, some people refer to it as the Wharton Library, right, has every industry covered that you could probably think of off the top of your head, they really do. So the left side, you can see there everything from many of the topics that we're talking about today, advertising and automotive and finance and green business. There's many, many different ways that we can go about this. And the one we're focused on today, the pharmaceutical industry, you can find lots of information. And again, some people use those industries kind of conflated together. Biotech is embedded within the pharma section here as well. So when I tapped into the pharmaceutical industry link on the research guides page, it pulls up this screen and we can see Marcella, who's our colleague over in Van Pelt. Lippincott is a wonderful way to learn more information on your own, but you could also reach out to Marcella, email, stop by office during office hours and say something like, hey, I am trying to learn as much as I can about the biotechnology industry. Can you guide me to a couple key resources? And when I tell you people in Lippincott know everything we have, and there are so many resources at your fingertips, and they'll walk you through them all. They are the kindest, most patient, helpful people you'll ever meet. So by all means, please make sure you leverage those resources. But we can look at company and industry details. We can look at news and articles and really get a feel for what's happening in this space so that I know what kinds of opportunities might exist, what kinds of challenges exist. You might want to ask questions as you're doing your outreach to alums. Tell me, what is your organization doing when it comes to using AI in drug discovery? And that can open up a whole great conversation and hopefully get you moving in a really industry-focused direction. A little deeper dives, a couple of the things that I found in the Lippincott Library Research Guides for Pharma are things like IBIS World, which I mentioned, reports on 700 different industries organized by codes. This particular snapshot was about the pharma and biotechnology side of the house. There's also D&B Hoovers. D&B is for Dun & Bradstreet. Hoovers is a great way to build a company list and start to look for ways to amass information that you can start to save for yourself about who's in this space and who do I want to be paying attention to in terms of learning as much as I can about the industry in which I have interest. And again, like I mentioned, a lot of the tools I'm talking about could be applied whether it's pharma and biotech or marketing and management roles, whether it's the automotive industry, aerospace, you fill in the blank, and we can probably find great resources to help you with that. And then, as I mentioned, learning from others and where to find and build your network. My Penn is a great way to go. LinkedIn is a great place to go. I like to use those two tools in tandem. My Penn being the internal LinkedIn of the university. So you're privileged, like myself as an alum, to be able to log into My Penn and find people who went to Penn specifically. And on the left side, as you can see, there's a bunch of, the filter list goes on and on and on. You can pick by industry, you can pick by location where they are, you can profile by degree program, year of graduation, whatever it might be. And when you find someone in My Penn, wonderful. Their LinkedIn profile is probably visible too. And My Penn will give you email addresses and things you can use to reach out and ask those good questions. Hey, I'd love to spend 15 minutes chatting. I'm really curious about what your organization's doing with this thing, with this type of question. And we'll talk more tomorrow during our LinkedIn session about how to network and ask those great questions. So be sure to tune in tomorrow. Where do you find jobs and internships in this space? Every industry sort of falls under a central job search tool like Indeed or LinkedIn, and there's lots of different kinds of things, and Handshake as well. But you'll also find industry-specific tools. So if you think about it like a big Venn diagram, there's always something in the bubble of your own industry that may lead you to some great resources as well. And Biospace is one of my favorite. You can see they've got a whole search job tabs, career resources, company profiles, and that's a really, really great way to target organizations as well. Plenty of biotechnology internships posted in the last 24 hours, as you can see on the right side of your screen from LinkedIn. So no matter what, keyword-wise, industry-wise, you can find the things you're looking for using so many of the tools that we're talking about today. And that's it for me. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me go through this exciting dig into the pharma and biotech industry. I hope you've liked learning about these two areas and how to dig into them a little bit deeper as much as I did putting this together. And I'll turn it back over to our host, Natty.
Thanks, Jamie. Does anyone have any questions in the chat about pharma or biotech that they thought would be interesting to throw out there and see if we can crowdsource it depending on what it is? While I wait for people to potentially ask some stuff, I'm reminded of, I used to be a pre-health advisor at Temple University, and a question that the pharmacy school would always ask their candidates in interviews was, if you were a drug, what would you be? So Jamie, if you were a drug, what would you be?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be famous, so I wouldn't be, Ozempic or a COVID-19 vaccine. I'd like to save people's lives, though. I think that's a pretty noble thing. So I know a lot of people that want to get into pharma and biotech because they value this concept of helping and extending life and doing all these wonderful things that are impactful in just about every human being, and sometimes our non-human friends too, right? Our animals and things like that. Biotech and pharma is in everything. So I'd want to make people feel better in any way, shape, or form that I could. Let me think. Maybe I'd be insulin. That's a life-saving drug, and it's been around for forever. It's one of the first examples of actually biotech and making a medication out of organic material like that. Pretty cool stuff.
Nice. Laura, you want to share? Laura put in our secret chat something.
Oh, I was just saying, I think bear is a pretty cool drug, right? It's one of those drugs that you can take on a daily basis. It's non-habit forming, right? And it's really supposed to help people with heart health issues or just help with regulation. So I think if I were to be any drug, I would like to be known as that drug. Yeah.
Yeah, go aspirin, go Advil, go Motrin, if we're allowed to say brand names of our
acetaminophen or what, ibuprofen.
Paracetamol if you're British, right?
Yeah. Cool. So we'll move on. We'll go talk through. I'm gonna start sharing about the media and entertainment field. It's an area that I'm super interested in because I used to work in it a little bit. So a little bit about my background. I was so back when I was applying to schools for undergrad, the only schools I was really interested in were ones that had a music business program. So I very quickly identified NYU as the one that had a great music business program, and that's where I started out. I, within the first year, switched out of music business because when I was an undergrad was right when Spotify was becoming a thing. And as you can imagine, the music industry has changed. I mean, especially then, that was probably one of the fastest you can see an industry change and just like flip on its head from being physical retail heavy to how streaming really completely upended how artists make money. Now I think it's much more touring and event heavy compared to before. It was a little bit more just the sales of physical records themselves. But I saw that was coming, so I switched to communications, which was kind of broad. But then I interned in the music industry, and so for a little over a year, I worked at a small music management company that worked with a pretty big artist who would tour simultaneously throughout the United States, the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, who does like Christmas rock music. So I worked with their management team for about a year, and it was really fun. So I'm excited to kind of share what I've seen and what I've learned about the media and entertainment industry, both from what I've seen myself, but also what I've learned through this job and working with tons of students who are interested in film and television and all sorts of other things that fall underneath this pretty large umbrella of media and entertainment. So that's me. I already said me, so I will skip over that. One of the things that's unique about entertainment is that compared to more traditional fields like consulting or finance or even tech, there's not always a clear path. It's not always a very obvious, here's this giant flagship program that people are going to go into. A lot of the production companies or like record labels, they don't hire hundreds and hundreds of the same position in a cyclical way. They hire people as they need them. So because of that, it means that your search has to be a little bit different for how you find things. We have lots of Penn students who go into this field. I think it's sneakily one of the top interests at Penn. Usually when I look at things, it's kind of down around the fifth most interesting area to Penn students. So it's definitely up there. But there are a few things that I want to highlight that I think are some of the like next step easy things, or like ways to think about how do I get my foot in, or how do I start in media and entertainment. One of the common ways is to become an assistant. That's kind of the most common job title you're going to see for across really both music business and film and television and other areas within entertainment. And that could be something like a production assistant is pretty common. A writer's assistant is a great position where you get to actually be in the writer's room and see so much about what that process is like, and then eventually hopefully get thrown a bone to start writing something yourself. You could even be, though, an executive or a personal assistant where you're working for an individual person within the industry. And sometimes that has some of the negative things attached to it, where you might be going and doing small errands. You might be grabbing coffee, kind of thing. But the entertainment industry is one that is very much network driven, and you often will pay your dues. So starting out as an assistant is an amazing way to learn other people within the industry and start to really build out your network, even if you are doing simple things like grabbing coffee or typing up notes from a session or something like that. Talent agency is another pretty big entry point. They have more of those actual structured programs where it might be, we know we're going to have an agent trainee program and we need this number of people every year. So this is a little bit more standardized to the recruiting type of experience that you might have seen in some of those other industries. UTA, CAA, Gersh, WME are some of the bigger names. All four of those post and handshake frequently, and we see our students go to those four. Especially Gersh and UTA are often doing recruitment events and coming to campus, I've seen in the past. And those could be really good entry points. Mailroom is kind of an under of each of these potentially. So part of being part of a talent agency, that might include working in the mailroom. It's kind of similar to the point I was making earlier, where it seems like you're doing some grunt labor, and to some extent you are, but you're also making amazing connections where you might work in the mailroom, but you are like literally brushing shoulders with, or talking to, or delivering mail to people who are higher up executives or producers or people in positions that you want to get to know. And because this is a field that is just so network driven, that can be really, really valuable. And if you're a creative person, there's lots of on-set or technical type positions. Many of those come in the form of kind of ad hoc as needed things. So there's sites, we have this on our community on our website, like Mandy.com or even Craigslist, where they might have a call out for like, we need a gaffer to come tape things up, or like we need someone to hold the boom. Like these smaller type positions where you just get on set can also be pathways into the entertainment field as a whole. But you'll see LinkedIn, but even like your own peers, like you may know people here at Penn who are working on either film projects or something creative that you would like to be a part of. That can be a good starting point. Another point is building up your portfolio. These fields are a little bit more open to having like a body of work that you can show people, especially if you want to be a writer or something on the creative side in the future. So next, I want to talk a little bit about industry versus job functioning. I think in particular, it's really important for the music industry and for entertainment, because a lot of people look at entertainment and say, this is exciting. There are shows that I love. When I was younger, I watched The Lion King, was obsessed with The Lion King. I watched it 10 times and wore out the DVD or whatever it might be. So you have a lot of passion there, but there's so many job functions within entertainment that could be different avenues for you to explore and could showcase different sides of you that you'd be interested in. And And some of those are very unique depending on what you want to do within entertainment, but they could also be general. Like there are marketing roles or financial analyst roles. Disney often comes to campus for the career fair, and they look for people to be financial analysts. So there are ways in which you could still be within the industry of entertainment, but have a job function that might be aligned to something that you either have a lot of experience in or that you're really also have the skills for and interested into. Before I go into the next part, I wanted to just open up a question to our career services people here today. So I'm putting people on the spot. What's like favorite artists that you feel like you're either listening to right now, you know, like every word to one of the songs that's out there? Who stands out on the music side of things?
Taylor Swift, come on. We have a couple Swifties in our office.
We have some of the Swifties in the office. Absolutely. Yep. Anyone else?
I'm old school though. I'm Billy Joel and all those other 70s, 80s artists. I'm a 70s baby.
For sure. Lara?
Yeah, I was gonna say Billy Joel too, with like the Madison Square Garden, like this being his last residence there. I've really been seeing a lot of ads for it. My parents are big Billy Joel fans, so I'm trying to get tickets. This has been a disaster. But yeah, when I think about entertainment industry, I definitely think about going to one of his concerts.
I thought you were gonna say like Paramore or Fall Out Boy or like.
Well, not everyone needs to know that.
What's wrong with knowing that?
Live stream. No, that's true. Whenever I'm on Peloton, I only take pop punk workouts, and I highly recommend that you do that.
Nice.
And David, who's top of your list right now?
So that's hard. Anybody that knows me knows that I love all kinds of music and all kinds of artists. But if I had to give a name to check out, I'd say Craig David would be somebody I would encourage people to check out and take a listen to. In some circles, not as mainstream, but he's put out some interesting stuff. So.
Awesome. And so then a follow-up question for everybody. Of any of those artists that you mentioned, what record label are they on?
I'm 99% sure Billy Joel is Columbia, but I could be wrong. It might not even exist as Columbia anymore.
Who's their manager? Or do you know their management company? Who their management company is?
No, we're not supposed to know, Natty.
Why not? Do you know who their distributor is?
No.
That's why we have you.
So my point is, though, I think everyone has probably, and this, I'm using the music industry as an example here, but you could do this for anything in entertainment. Like you probably have a thing that you love. Maybe it's a movie, a TV show, an artist. And there are a million roles underneath that help make that person successful that is oftentimes invisible even to people who consider themselves big fans. And all of those different things could be potential entry point into the entertainment industry. So even if like there are really big names, a lot of it ends up going under like Warner or Sony. But there are smaller labels underneath those, like Atlantic Records and things like that might be subsidiaries or underneath some of the larger record labels. I wanted to just point out some of those that exist in just the music industry. You could do the same thing for entertainment. But there's a record label and they have all sorts of things that they're doing for their artists. One of them, internal for the big record labels, they need people in A&R. Those are the people that like go to shows and find new talent. That was traditional. I think probably there's more people like trolling through Bandcamp or Spotify these days, finding like what's going to be the next big thing. But there could be like marketing, people in production, people in sales and distribution, people who are more like management based. Lots of different types of roles that you could look for. There are PROs like ASCAP and BMI. These are the people that basically have the royalties accumulate up for whenever you stream a song. Or when you hear it playing in the elevator or on the radio at Wawa. And those are places that you could work too. They need a lot of analysts for those types of things. And a lot of relationship building people who might be coordinating between artists themselves, or one of the other ones on here, a publishing company. And publishing companies will often act on behalf of artists to negotiate deals for licensing or for collecting the different royalties that are coming through. And management companies and talent agencies are other parts of it. They represent the artists in different ways. Talent agencies in particular are really huge at connecting people together. So a lot of times when you see somebody I'm trying to think who it was. Somebody had that big concert that was on like in Fortnite that one time. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? That was probably something that was negotiated and made happen through their talent agent. A lot of times talent agents are the ones who are kind of making these connections and having things happen like that. Or there could be a booking agent specifically to get them on the touring side of things or events. And the distributors, like there are still physical distributors like CD Baby and things that like print things. Vinyl's making a comeback in a weird way, but those same distributors also make sure that artists get their things put onto the major streaming services. But every one of these has a name and there's a company attached to all of these, and there are specific jobs with all of them. Yes, Dustin said in the chat, it was Travis Scott. That's right. Travis Scott was the one who had the Fortnite concert. But these are all potential ways that you could find a position. And there are people in these roles who are helping either the artists or the creative license or IP, things that you love. There are people behind that are making that successful. I didn't even mention like marketing or graphic designers or all sorts of other people. And I'm going to give an example of something that I did last night to help identify, because like I asked here, Jamie had a potential idea that maybe it was Columbia. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong necessarily. But most of the time you just don't know. So one thing I tried looking at, I mentioned ASCAP earlier, where you kind of find the different royalties that are being generated. They have something called SongView, where you can look up a song and see some of the additional information of like who's the publisher attached to that artist or attached to that song. So I looked up, I had on my Spotify earlier in the day, Frog on the Floor by 100 Gex, which is a weird song, but it's fun. But I saw Domino Publishing Company, had never heard of them in my life. But I looked them up. I did a quick Google search. I went on to, there's something called the Music Business Jobs. And they actually had a posting that was just not that old. It was for a publishing assistant in the UK. They also have a New York office. And I saw some things that they had posted earlier this month. So even in just that quick search of trying to identify an artist that I was interested in, finding who their publisher was, looking if they had jobs posted, I found a potential avenue for finding something. I did the same thing with Olivia Rodrigo. I've been listening to Vampire. And in Spotify, you can actually do this. You can go to show credits, and sometimes you'll get some extra info of either who the writer was for the song, or sometimes it'll show the producer or the record label that's attached to it, or the publisher. In this case, it had Sony Music Publishing. Went to Sony Music's website. Sony's one of the bigger players, and they had big flagship internships that were being posted right now that had all sorts of different entry levels of going into different return offers for some of those different areas I mentioned earlier, like A&R or some of the different things underneath record labels or as part of a publisher. So these are just ways that you can kind of research and find out more about some of your favorite things that are out there and potentially find a good avenue to apply to something. But as I've mentioned, it's very network driven, this field. So a lot of it is also who you know. So really recommend, we're going to be talking tomorrow more about networking. So recommend stopping by and tuning in then. But Jamie did a great job of a starting point of how you can start to identify people. There are Penn alums working in all sorts of cool places, and you'll surprise yourself. The other thing I wanted, Jamie mentioned this too, I think, but our outcomes data has a good timeline of showing when things are, but also the specific job titles and employer names where Penn students are. So that can be a good avenue to kind of find out next who you want to talk to. And this is just a quick example. These are jobs that Penn alum worked in recently within the last couple of years. These are also things that I'm pretty sure I saw on Handshake. So lots of these are posted on Handshake. Someone became a music composer for Riot Games who does League of Legends. Someone was a visual artist development for Netflix. At Sony, someone had social partnerships media coordinator. And for the New York Times, there are a couple things. There's a media strategist, but also a software engineer. So some of these might be some of those job functions that you don't always associate directly with these companies, but you can see a lot of different roles and things that our Penn, your network that already exists, is working in right now. So with that, I am going to call it quits for the media entertainment section, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has anything in the chat or any comments or thoughts. Anyone thinking about anything from our career services people before we move on to the next area?
You mentioned Natty. I was just thinking to myself, I'm sure the industry is pretty competitive, right? So a lot of the timelines showed a little bit of a peak in the spring semester, but things are being posted now, right? So it makes sense to learn as much as you can and start to get ready, right?
Some of the bigger things we'll post now. Honestly, most of the things I saw now were fall or spring internships. Some of them are remote. So the summer ones for the record labels are probably not going to be until the spring is when they'll be posted. The ones that like you should be aware of for like the bigger, I mentioned the ones that are a little bit more cyclical, like the agent trainee programs or things that might be specific to a talent agency. Those tend to post as early as around like November-ish and might have deadlines that are somewhere like January or February. And those are considered pretty early. Like so much is spring dominated, even by the bigger players in the industry. Have some things that are even still pretty spring dominated.
Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. So we will move on from that. Who was next? Was it Laura or David? I don't remember.
I've got next.
All right. Let me find. Do you have to reshare it, David?
Yes. And we'll just give it a moment.
There you go. I think you should be good.
Sounds good. So thanks, Natty, for that amazing overview of media and entertainment. And we'll just keep things moving from there and move towards the federal government. So before we jump into some information on the government, just as a quick aside, I also have had some previous experience in this sector as well. Takes me back to my days prior to college. And in college, I had a chance to intern in a couple of different areas. The first was with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, otherwise known as the FDIC. And then I had a chance to spend a summer in the US Patent and Trademark Office. So from a personal perspective, as well as several family members who have worked in the federal government, I definitely have a personal interest in this space, and I'm happy to share a little bit more insight into the sector for everybody. So why don't we start with some fast facts? There are over 2 million civil servants at over 400 federal agencies. So there are quite a number of positions that are available in the federal government. And what people might not be as familiar with, 7% of federal workers are under the age of 30, and that's actually lower than the percentage of workers under the age of 30 in other areas. So they don't have as many employees that are fresh out of college or within the first few years. But what people might have heard, 31% of government workers are eligible to retire within the next couple of years. So I present this just to kind of show that beyond existing opportunities that are available this year, as you think ahead and longer term, there can be some really interesting things that might be opening up in a couple of years. The other thing I just wanted to point out real quick, there are interesting position titles and names in the federal government, so things that aren't necessarily as intuitive. So just be mindful of that as you navigate this process, that you might encounter titles that might be a little bit unclear and might not clearly reflect the role that you would be working in. The other thing that people oftentimes think about is, if I'm interested in the federal government, I've got to be in DC or the DC metro area. But that's actually a little bit of a myth. There are opportunities for federal government positions in all US states, territories, and over 140 foreign countries. And 85% of the jobs within the federal government are actually outside of the DC metro area. And based on a recent analysis, more than 50,000 employees work internationally. So you don't necessarily have to move to the DC area. I'm actually from DC. I think DC is great. But for those who prefer to be in other geographic regions, there's still opportunities for you in the government. Wanted to shift to an overview on some things to keep in mind for opportunities in this space. The hiring process might seem different compared to other industries and sectors, some of which have been discussed earlier today, just given the policies and requirements that are unique to the government. And even within the federal government, the process from one agency or department could be very different from what you experience with another. So there's not necessarily a standardized approach or protocol. It is very unique to the department or agency. So just be mindful of that as you navigate the process. We'll talk a little bit more about timeline moving forward, but there is variance similarly, depending upon what agencies and departments you're thinking about. So there are some opportunities that are open a little bit earlier in the year, but there's certainly a lot more that are available closer to the end of the academic year. We oftentimes think about handshake for different fields, and I know that's been mentioned earlier as well, but it's really important for federal government to utilize resources outside of handshake as you navigate the process. We'll go over some of those examples momentarily. The time from application to offer certainly can be lengthy. So just be mindful that it's not a quick process. That does not necessarily have anything to do with their interest in you as a candidate in terms of how quickly they are able to move. Oftentimes, again, due to policies and requirements and protocol that needs to be followed, the time from application to offer might be longer than what you experience in other sectors. Some opportunities are available during the academic year. Each year I hear from Penn students that have volunteered or pursuing part-time positions during the academic year with different agencies. So it's not necessarily only a summer experience kind of thing. You can find some opportunities during the academic year if you're interested and available. And then certain positions may require security clearance. So just be mindful of that. That again, is something to think about because security clearances can take quite some time to complete and might be done well in advance of when you're thinking about pursuing an opportunity. So just be mindful of that. Within the federal government, we've talked about this idea of pathways. They've embraced pathways, but look at it from a slightly different perspective. So I just wanted to share with you how government opportunities might be classified. The details of these things aren't as important, but I think the biggest takeaway is that regardless of what agency you're looking at, there might be different ways that they're targeting and recruiting opportunities for interns and full-time. So most commonly, they'll fall under one of these four areas. So the most obvious one that people think about is the internship program. This is open to college students. They would include paid opportunities at federal agencies while you're currently enrolled as a student. For internships, there's also another opportunity that's a little bit different than what people might see in other spaces. They're called post-secondary student hiring authorities. And this is in essence a way for a agency or department to hire a student on a limited time basis. It could be for a summer or let's say a semester, but potentially up to a whole year. So you might have a chance to work a little bit longer if you're interested and available to do that, but it wouldn't exceed a period of 4 years in length. For full-time opportunities, the two options are the Pathways Recent Graduates Program. And really the key aspect to keep in mind with that is they really emphasize this idea of career development along with mentoring and training. So you're not just hired for a position, they really do look to supplement that with ways to help you grow and develop as a professional. And then there's the College Graduate Hiring Authority, which is basically a way for them to bring you in an appointment that might lead to a permanent position. So again, different pathways within the government, but just wanted to provide some clarity on what that means. I alluded to important resources a little bit ago, and so just wanted to share with you a few things that are specific to searches in this space. So opportunities can be found, of course, through USA Jobs. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But what people might not be as familiar with is they do have a section on occupations by college major. So I talked earlier about how some position titles might not be clear on what they mean, and it might not be intuitive in terms of understanding the job. So this is a really cool resource because it allows you to think about the major or concentration in your area of study and just see what opportunities align with those particular majors or disciplines. You're not necessarily relegated to opportunities that solely align with your major. But again, just to give you a better, more comprehensive sense of what those opportunities are, I think this is a really interesting resource and place to start. A common question that comes up is what are the different departments and agencies? So I'm sure people have familiarity with at least a handful, but as I mentioned earlier, over 400 different ones are available. So another great resource you might want to think about is USA.gov and their listing of federal government departments and agencies. Very comprehensive. And it also gives you a chance to find direct links to their websites, and in some cases, maybe contact information. So that would be one of the underutilized resources that I would strongly recommend if you're thinking about opportunities in the government, just to learn more about the variety of things that you can do that are out there. There's another website called Go Government through the Partnership for Public Service. And this is really a resource to help demystify the federal hiring process for students. So it really covers a lot of things such as benefits, the application process, and other things that might not be as clear as you navigate it. And then finally, on the Career Services website, our industry community, Government Law and Public Policy would be a great resource. So definitely check all of these out as you go through your individual search. Where to find jobs and internships? I would actually say start with usajobs.gov. So it's the federal government's portal or site for opportunities. In addition to that, you'll definitely find things listed in Handshake, Indeed, and LinkedIn. But I would also say that there are opportunities that are posted directly through the government agencies' websites and department websites. So you'll find opportunities in all of those three clusters of places, but definitely take advantage and browse through the different resources available. And on the right side of the screen is a snapshot of featured employers. So I mentioned the industry community in the previous slide. So here are some examples of recently posted employers that have opportunities that have been interested in seeking out Penn students. So we try to make that easy to find through our website as well. I mentioned hiring timelines. So what I had mentioned before was that it really depends upon the role, and you'll see some variance, but overwhelmingly, you'll see that a lot of the opportunities are later in the academic year. So here's some of our data that we pulled. Just for a little bit of clarity, this would include a couple of opportunities that might not be federal government, they might be state or local, but I still think the overall trend is pretty indicative of what we've seen in the past for federal government opportunities. And you can click on the link for a more comprehensive look for opportunities that people have pursued in recent years. In terms of cultivating networks, so similar to what Jamie and Natty mentioned, LinkedIn, of course, is a place that we would encourage you to look in addition to my pen. What I thought was interesting, I just did a quick search yesterday. If you pull an agency, you might not necessarily assume how much representation there is from Penn in the federal government. I know it's not a sector that there's as much discussion on, but as you can see here, I just did a search for Department of State, and what was interesting to me was the number of Penn alumni that are working in that agency as well as other agencies that came up in that search. And as you'll see that there's over 1,000 in the US and a subset of that in DC. So lots of representation from Penn in the federal government, and definitely take advantage of LinkedIn to connect with people and have those conversations. And just some final thoughts to wrap up. So we really encourage you to learn more about opportunities. It's one thing to find them and apply for them, but to get a better understanding and have conversations. So definitely check out our upcoming career fairs. The federal government fair that's virtual November 17th logically makes a lot of sense. But I list these fairs from another perspective as well. Government agencies have represented themselves at a lot of the fairs that we've offered through career services. So even in areas where you might not assume that there are opportunities, agencies are really eager for students that have an interest in working for the government. So here's a list of things coming up. And of course, there'll be more events in the spring to check out. The second thing I'll point out is the resume for opportunities in the government can be very different than resumes you use for other sectors and industries. Typically, they're longer and they would include additional information that wouldn't be common for resumes in other sectors. So you might want to give yourself more time as you go through this process. Creating your first version of this document might take a little bit more work because, again, it's going to be a little bit different. But what's really important for the resume is that it clearly addresses what's outlined in those job descriptions. So don't necessarily leave it up to the recruiter or hiring manager to put two and two together. you really need to make as clear of a case that you've had this experience or have that skill set through your previous experiences. And then there are also volunteer opportunities within the government. So sometimes people think about internships as the only way to gain experience, but there's some really interesting volunteer opportunities, again, if you have some time and the chance to pursue them. And that is as valuable as anything else. So just because it's labeled volunteer doesn't mean that it can't be helpful for you as you pursue opportunities from there. So that's all I have on the federal government.
David, just to jump in real quick, I would say for students thinking about those volunteer opportunities, if you're an undergrad, we have our summer funding, which has definitely helped some students leverage government unpaid or low paid experiences into career paths.
And we also had a question come through in the chat. If we can explain how to use LinkedIn to find jobs with Penn alumni. That's an amazing question. We're actually going to go really in depth with it tomorrow. But I gave a starting point in the chat. I think a really good good place to start it is going to LinkedIn's University of Pennsylvania page and then clicking on the alumni tab. I put the link in there if that helps. And you can kind of play around and find all sorts of things that way. Cool. Laura, did you want to get started with our next area?
Yeah, last but not least.
Oh, real quick, I will say if anyone continues to have questions, we have a little bit of a delay between what we're saying when these questions come in. So if you want to start throwing some questions in now through Laura's session, we can always address them right after at the end before we head off for the day. So please, if you have things coming through, just drop it in the chat and we're happy to talk it through. Sorry, Laura, go ahead.
No problem. Okay, so like I was saying, last but not least, I know that Natty and David mentioned specifically that they had experience in the industries that they were talking about. Now, I have not worked in the consumer products field, but as someone that buys a lot of stuff, I feel like I am still an expert enough to kind of talk to you guys about the industry and maybe how to get involved a little bit more. So what are consumer products? What does this mean, right? So consumer products are broadly categorized as durable or non-durable goods. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation. But I thought this was such an easy way to break down how you consume things, right? So food being something that's durable, right? Luxury products, right? Really anything that you buy, touch on a daily basis kind of falls into this consumer products category. And it's highly dependent on consumer behaviors, which change over time, right? So it's really important to stay up to date with different articles that you read, industry trends, market trends. Think about when the new iPhone came out, right? Every few years, maybe even every year now, right? A new iPhone comes out and all of a sudden everybody rushes, right, over to the store to buy it. But when it first came out, right, this was such a revolutionary idea for people, right? It radically changed consumer behavior and changed kind of that entire industry as a whole. So some goods are necessary, like I mentioned earlier, and some are considered these luxury goods. We have quite a bit of interest from Penn students wanting to work in luxury brands or within the luxury market, right? So think perfume or high-end vehicles. I think it's like Bradley Cooper that's on the commercials for, is it Lincoln? Right? And that always gets me. I'm like, I should buy that car. But not that I can. But
isn't it Matthew McConaughey? I think it's Matthew McConaughey, right? And he does like a weird little hand thing as he's driving.
I'm like, wow, that car looks cool, but I know nothing other than what's on the commercial. But in general, right, consumer demand really does drive this industry as a whole. It also relies heavily on marketing and advertising, right? So while these might be considered kind of separate industries or sectors in terms of like how you may think about applying for them or when the application cycles may be, right? Being in the marketing and advertising world touches the industry of consumer products. So Natty was talking a lot about how this idea of industry versus job function can almost cross boundaries. And I want you to think about that a lot too, as we talk about consumer products. So as I mentioned before, durable versus non-durable goods, right? So durable are your big ticket items, things that last longer than 3 years, right? as a general rule of thumb, right? So think about appliances, right, that you might buy for your home, cars. What else lasts longer than 3 years? Nothing's coming to mind at this point because everything I get nowadays breaks after like 6 months. I'm not sure if anyone else feels the same way, but my mom was telling me a story about how she bought a vacuum and to this day it's lasted like 30 years. So it hasn't happened to me, but I believe it to be true. And then
musical instruments. I bought a guitar not that long ago, and I hope it lasts more than 6 months.
Yeah, I hope so too, with how expensive guitars are. And then, of course, non-durable goods, right? So faster moving goods. You go to the grocery store maybe twice a week, once a week, right? So you consume these on a daily basis and you run out of them too, right? So think about this idea of shelf life. Perishable items, right? As you might think of them in terms of grocery products, but also things that just like aren't made to last. Different career pathways, right? I've listed the 10 big industries from the past year in the consumer products world. A lot of these you probably have heard of before, right? The big ones like Nestle, Pepsi, General Mills, right? Think of your Kellogg's, the cereal brands that you buy, that Lay's potato chips, right? Any kind of consumer item that you may eat on a daily basis, right? A lot of them are these big conglomerates that have multiple different products within that organization. Estee Lauder in terms of like beauty products or perfumes, things like that, right? It's important to stay up to date because, as mentioned, this market and the industry can rapidly change, right? Before we know it, is it called the Oracle, right? The new like the goggles that you can wear, right? Where you're venturing into like a 3D world, right? Like before you know it, there's a new consumer product. There's something new that's pushing the market in a different direction, right? So while these may not seem like the most typical forms, of information to stay up to date, they are really important in understanding this idea of consumer products as a whole, right? So The Economist, even an article within that, this IBM, the Artificial Intelligence Revolution in Retail and Consumer Products is really important too. It's being used to help predict what consumers want next, which is really interesting, right? I couldn't even fathom in my mind what else I could possibly want or what would make my life easier or what I could consume, but there always seems to be something new that's coming out that, I have to be the first one to try or I have to buy it. Right? And I'm sure we all kind of feel that way. A few of us also mentioned we have countless communities, right? And we try to follow big industry trends and how we name them. So ours is called Fashion, Retail, and Consumer Products. And on that communities page, there's a bunch of information and links to different websites, different articles that you may want to read to help keep current. Where do you find your jobs and internships? Again, it feels a little repetitive, right? Because we talked a lot about these larger platforms like Indeed, of course, Handshake. I hope you guys all know how to use that. And if you don't, that's why we're here. But these smaller kind of niche job boards as well, like Fashion United or Retail Crossing, Ripple Match is an interesting one. LinkedIn, I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit more tomorrow about leveraging the power of LinkedIn to find positions and also to help position yourself accordingly to the industry that you want to be in. And one called Global Data, which I want to talk specifically about in the next slide. Before we get there, I think it was David also that mentioned this kind of featured jobs and employers that we tag to our communities page. So each week we try to go through all the new postings and jobs that come in through Handshake and tag ones that could be of interest to our students or where we've seen Penn students go in the past. So just by going to that page, we've done a lot of the hard work for you to find some new and interesting positions in the consumer products world. So Global Data. This is one that I kind of wanted to bring to light. I'm not sure how popular this is, right? It was kind of hard to tell. It's not something that we necessarily advertise within our communities page, but it's something that I looked at to get a lot of the information for this PowerPoint, and I felt like it was really helpful. You can be a subscriber where you pay, right? Just like you can with anything else, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. However, there's so much free information and data out there within this database, and specifically about the consumer products world. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. There's different webinars you can join for free. There's different reports that you can download to stay current with trends from 1 year or 20 years to help make predictions of where you think the consumer products industry is going to go. And then where to find and build your network. I mean, we cannot stress enough how important LinkedIn is. I mean, I think 3 out of 4 of us have literally pulled this exact same screenshot and input it into our presentations, but it could not be more true, right? And Dustin seems to be like the common denominator against all of us, like, you're friends with Dustin. So I think that's very funny as well. But again, if you are searching for alum, you go right to this page. As David mentioned, you're going to have a lot, of information and alum available to you. I recommend highly narrowing down your search, right? So I did this by class year, by narrowing it down from 2021 to 23. That's one of the first things that I would do. And another thing, right, is narrowing it down by the organization. So I just had Procter & Gamble on there. It did appear twice, weirdly, because I had to click on it twice for it to go through. And I think if you can get a really digestible number, right? So you have 6 profiles that you can go through that match kind of these terms that you've put together. That will allow for a really easy and kind of quick way of going through what Penn alum maybe speak the best to me. Dustin, you have made it. Yes, you're getting highlighted constantly. So for example, these are the first 3 that, I had appeared as I scroll down and look at the 6 total alum. You might look at the last one and it just has LinkedIn member, right? So that's why I say get it to a really digestible number so you can make smart inferences about where you want to spend your time. In David's presentation, we saw nearly 1,200 alum were attached to the Department of State. That's a lot of people to go through, right? But you may be able to use those location filters. You may be able to use their course of study to help narrow it down even more. So when you do reach out using my pen, right, a source that Jamie mentioned, you have this established point of connection. Hi, Morgan, I see you studied, retail and fashion at Penn. I'm a sophomore studying the same thing, hoping we can chat for 20 minutes, right? Something terrible has happened.
You broke it.
I broke it. Well, that was really it, though. So, I mean, at least I don't have to continue on and pretend that there was a lot more to say. But I'm excited to chat more tomorrow and tell you guys, the importance of using not only your professional documents, but your networking strategies and building on your LinkedIn profiles. So once you know what industry or industries you want to explore more, you have all of the information you need to do so. That's it for me.
Nice. Thanks. Any questions? I mentioned earlier, if anyone's in the chat that has questions, please throw them in. We have a few minutes at the end here that we can always address some things that are top of mind for you. I noticed that in that list of the top CPG employers that you had there, a lot of them have a recruiting presence at Penn, and so many of them have Penn alum at them. We see a lot of them attend the Career Link Fair that's coming up on September 8th, I believe. It's Friday. And there's all sorts of different programs that they have, either big flagship programs for entry or even sometimes smaller positions. All of us, I think, have mentioned the different kinds of job functions that might be within the industries that we highlighted. Anyone else have anything that comes top of mind about CPG?
Not CPG specifically, but one of the resources that Laura highlighted, which I was like, oh, that makes me remember that IBM article, right? IBM is known to some people as a technology firm and others as a consulting firm. Anytime you can think of big consulting firms, they have white papers. They have people whose full-time careers it is to research industries and write articles in digestible chunks, right? So if anybody had questions about what is it really like, or what kind of trends are happening, or I have 5 minutes to learn as much as I can, consulting firm white papers or research areas are really, really helpful to dig into too. So great for pulling that IBM article. And of course, AI isn't everything. As the engineering advisor, I'm like, woo, go AI.
And it's like sneaky, right? Like I feel like on our side, it's been in everything for way longer than people realize. Like we've been talking about applicant tracking systems, ATS, for a while, and they have often gone in and scanned people's resumes using AI to pick out, here's the person that best fits this job description. But in some ways, it's like now you too have the power to wield AI against them in how you might be creating documents or thinking about things. There was just a really quick question about if there's going to be a recording session for those who can't make it. Yes, this is going to be, if you miss some of today, as soon as we're done with the stream, this recording will be on our YouTube page. And same thing is true for tomorrow's session. If people aren't able to make that, that should go up onto the YouTube right after we're done presenting tomorrow around like 3:30-ish time. And that also reminds me, the industry job function thing, many of us, Jamie and David and I, went to a conference for Ivy Plus, and Handshake was there presenting. And one of the big points they made was that the government right now is one of the top people posting the Handshake and trying to get new candidates in, as they're seeing tons and tons of people retiring. Government jobs are one of those ones that you often think of as being really true still to this day, like careers where people will stay for a really long time. And they were mentioning the point that any job that you can think of exists at the level of the government, in many of the agencies that David highlighted and was talking through, but in so many different ways too.
That's what I remember too, Natty, from graphic designers to artists to technology people to agents. I mean, all kinds of great things. And we had a question pop into the chat as well. As a current student, do we have access to MyPen? Yes, you do. It's pen key password protected. You just go to MyPen alumni and you can log right in and scan through the directory and see thousands upon thousands of profiles. In MyPen, there are also opportunities for alums, like many of us on the panel today, to go in and say we're available for mentorship or open to answering questions. So you'll often see that little flag on someone's profile, and you know that they've really given some thought to the fact that they want to help out current students and fellow alumni. So by all means, they're great resources to reach out to. I like to use LinkedIn and MyPen together. I might find all the people that work at Procter & Gamble on LinkedIn and say, oh, cool. If I can find, Laura in LinkedIn, but I can't connect to Laura, or I'm not close enough to know how to reach out, I can go back to MyPen and usually find a permanent email address and can reach out to that person directly. And from one pen person to another, that's a warm outreach, in my opinion. So I'd leverage that resource as much as I could.
It's so good using them both together because you can see people's full career trajectory. I mean, a question we get all the time, the phrase that I've hated hearing recently is like, well, what about the exit outcomes and the exit opportunities when I'm done my first job? And one of the things I do to combat people who ask that question is just look at what other Penn alum have done, and you'll see the trajectory of all sorts of different things that they've moved between and gone into, moving from smaller companies to bigger names or vice versa. People move in a lot of interesting ways. And I think that's one of the coolest things about looking through a LinkedIn profile is you can really see sometimes as far back as what their internships were and how that led them through their current career. Any other thoughts before we wrap up for today from any of our panelists here? Cool. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We will be back again at the same time tomorrow, going more in depth into networking, which it seems we got a lot of questions about. So we'll dive way deeper into that and a few other things that are just really essential to when you're at the phase of applying to these types of industries and positions that we've talked about today, that I think will be really great to go in depth into. I think I hear behind the wall behind me, I think we have smoothie bowls waiting for us. So I think we're going to go grab some of those. But it was great having everyone here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I've learned a lot myself. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.